Sometimes you only understand what you felt after the lights are already on. Before anything else, I want to know, have you ever had that moment when life suddenly pulls a thread you didn't even know was loose and everything unravels? Tell me in the comments, I really want to know. And while you're at it, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and if you can, support this project by clicking thanks or becoming a member, because your help keeps this space alive and full of stories worth telling. Now let's go. My name is Oliver. I'm 33, and around the neighborhood everyone knows me as Oliver the Internet Guy, the one who fixes everything, installs, configures, reboots. If it has a cable, I'll make it work. I'm always carrying a backpack, pliers in my pocket, and that face that looks like I've got it all together. But inside, it's another story. I was raised by Mrs. Thompson, my mother, a woman of steel who raised me alone after my father disappeared when I was 8. She always said a good man is one who works hard and sleeps with a clean conscience. And I obeyed. Since I was a kid, I took apart radios, played with sockets, cut the power in the house just to figure out how to fix it again. Life taught me to be practical, direct, functional. I grew up hearing that men don't cry, don't feel too much, don't talk about emotions, but must treat women with respect. So I stayed silent. Silent when I wanted to look at a friend differently. Silent when I realized what I felt didn't fit the conversations at the shop or the bar. Silent for so long I almost forgot the sound of my own wants. I had a few flings, all in secret, without names or records, and whenever someone asked why I didn't have a girlfriend, I laughed it off, made an excuse, said no time for that, and changed the subject. The truth is, I had time. What I didn't have was courage. In a small neighborhood where everyone knows everything, one wrong step becomes gossip in the bakery, the salon, the grocery line. So I molded myself to that. Learned to walk the line, to hide my eyes, to play the game. But nobody can wear a mask forever. And if I'm telling you this, it's because my script changed. It all started on a hot Tuesday grey sky, that sticky kind of air that clings to your skin. I'd already done 3 jobs, climbed 2 poles, and dealt with a client convinced the internet was down because Mercury was in retrograde. No joke. By the end of the shift, a new service popped up, full installation at number 217. Client name, Eric. Didn't ring a bell. The address was on one of those quiet, recently renovated streets with spaced-out houses and the kind of silence that felt heavy. Something about it hooked me. I don't know if it was intuition, boredom, or just the name. All I know is I accepted the job, hopped on my bike and went. At that moment it seemed like just another day, but it wasn't, not even close. I had no idea that from then on everything would spin out of control, and maybe, for the first time, that was a good thing. Because sometimes change doesn't start with an earthquake, it starts with an address, a name, a network cable in your hand, and the strange feeling that the world is about to turn differently. I arrived at the house at number 217 early in the afternoon, still sweating from my last job, my shirt sticking to my back and my worn cap pulled low over my face, parked the bike, grabbed my tools and rang the bell. Nothing. Rang again, and just when I was about to call the office, the door creaked open, and that's when I saw him for the first time, Eric, in dark jeans, a plain t-shirt, messy hair, and eyes that carried an entire world inside them, his smile shy, almost apologetic as he asked, "Hey, you're the internet guy, right?" And all I could do was nod, because something in the way he looked at me knocked me off balance. Maybe it was his tone, maybe the softness in his voice, or maybe just my own mind playing tricks. But from that first glance, I knew this house was going to be harder work than any router, and as he led me through half-empty rooms full of boxes and fresh paint, I could feel the weight of a new beginning clinging to the walls, his voice breaking the silence as he admitted he'd just moved in and was still a bit lost. And though I didn't press for details, I could see it. Too much silence in his eyes for someone just unpacking a new life. So I knelt down in the living room and got to work pulling cables, and he stayed nearby with his arms crossed, watching, asking if I'd been doing this long, and I told him nearly a decade, asked if he was from around here, said I'd grown up nearby, that everyone knew me, and that's when he said softly, "Yeah, people already told me about you, that you're the guy who fixes everything, and that you live alone." Words that carried more weight in the way he looked at me than in what he actually said, And I deflected, joking about work and how little time I had. But his smile lingered before he slipped into the kitchen for water, leaving me on the floor with my heart racing for no good reason. And when I finished the installation, I showed him the signal on his phone, everything perfect, and as I packed up, he walked me to the door, thanked me, and said in a tone I couldn't quite decipher, "I'll remember that, maybe I'll need help with more things," before offering his hand. And that handshake lasted just a second too long, his eyes searching through the armor I'd built for years. And I walked out of that house flushed, dry-mouthed, with the unmistakable feeling that something had shifted inside me, and the terrifying thought that maybe it wasn't all in my head. The very next day he texted me, "Hey Oliver, sorry to bother you, but could you come by again? The Wi-Fi signal's acting up." I knew it was a lie. Every fiber of me knew it. But I replied, yes, I'd stop by later. And when I arrived at number 217, the same smile was waiting at the door. Only this time the air felt different, heavier, charged, and instead of leading me straight to the modem, he gestured toward the living room and said, "Have a seat. Want some water?" The boxes were still stacked in the corners, but now one was open, books and photos scattered across the floor, and I caught a glimpse of one picture of him with a woman, both smiling, arms around each other, before he quietly explained it had been his wife, ex-wife now, that they'd split recently and it hadn't been easy, his voice carrying the kind of pain that lingers long after the moment has passed. And when his eyes met mine, there was a weight there, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. So I sat down, pretending to check the modem while he lingered close watching. His questions simple but loaded, asking how long I'd been doing this work, if I was from around here. And when I answered, he just smiled like he already knew more than he was saying, and then came the words that stuck. "I just wanted someone to talk to. Maybe I just wanted to see you again." That broke through me in a way I wasn't ready for, because I'd spent years avoiding looks like that, avoiding everything that might give me away. But in his silence and his half-smile, there was an honesty I couldn't deflect. So when I left that night, tools packed and signal perfectly fine, my body was buzzing with the truth I didn't want to name, that whatever this was, it was already more than just a service call, and the thought of seeing him again had already rooted itself deep inside me. The following afternoon, my phone buzzed again with his name lighting up the screen. "Oliver, could you stop by?" The connection dropped again. I didn't even bother convincing myself it might be true this time. I knew it wasn't about the Wi-Fi, but still, I threw my tools in the backpack and went, because the truth was I wanted to be there as much as he wanted me there. When I arrived at number 217, the gate was open, the house quiet, and he appeared from the hallway in an oversized t-shirt, hair tousled like he'd just gotten out of bed. And when he saw me, he smiled with that lazy kind of relief that made my chest tighten. "Came straight in?" he asked, half joking, and I shrugged. "The door was open. Starting to think you do this on purpose." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that doesn't echo but lingers, and said, "You came quick." I answered simply, "You called." And for a long moment neither of us said anything more. The air felt thicker, almost humming with something unspoken. He pointed toward the office, where the modem blinked normally, no issues at all, and when I raised an eyebrow he just shrugged. Maybe I just wanted company. Those words hit me harder than I expected, because I wasn't used to people speaking so directly, especially with fear hiding in their tone. But he said it like a truth that couldn't stay locked up any longer. "You're different, Oliver," he added after a pause, and when I tried to laugh it off and asked, "Different how?" he tilted his head and studied me as though he could see right through the walls I'd built, finally saying, "Like you've lived more than you let on, and like you're hiding more than you'd like." His words pinned me in place. For years I'd worn my rough edges like armor, the beard, the boots, the no-nonsense way I moved through the world, but somehow he saw past it, straight into the places I kept buried. That scared me. So I deflected, telling him he didn't exactly say everything he thought either, that I often wondered what he wasn't saying, and instead of answering he simply sat on the couch and gestured for me to sit too. I hesitated, but curiosity won, and I sat down beside him, the silence stretching between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. And then he broke it with something that went straight to my core. "You're the only person I've been able to sit in silence with and not feel alone." I swallowed hard, unable to look at him at first because it felt like he'd stolen the words from my own chest, the ones I never dared to voice. All I could whisper was, "You're messing with me, you know that." But even as I said it, my voice was trembling with something I couldn't name. He didn't answer, just looked at me, and in that look was everything I'd been taught to hide. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door, both our hands brushing the handle but neither moving to open it, as though the world outside could wait. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked quietly, and though my throat was dry, I managed to answer, "If you want me to." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "I do." And with that, the silence between us said more than words ever could. I walked away that night knowing I was already in deeper than I'd planned, and that the next day I'd be back not for the internet, but for him. After that night, things shifted in a way I hadn't felt in years, because the next day came and then the day after that, and somehow I kept finding myself at number 217, sometimes with an excuse about the router, sometimes pretending there was a signal drop, and other times with no excuse at all, just the quiet understanding that I would show up and he would be there waiting. What began as casual visits blurred into habit, and habit blurred into something harder to define, because each time I walked through his door, the air felt different, less like a service call, more like stepping into a space that belonged to both of us. Herrick would offer coffee I never asked for, leave the door unlocked as though expecting me, and sometimes he'd just let the silence stretch out while we sat in the same room, our eyes meeting between pauses in the conversation that said more than words. One evening he messaged me saying he wanted to try cooking, just something simple, don't laugh if it goes wrong. And when I showed up, the table was half set, books still on the floor from unpacking, and a faint smell of tomato and spices drifting through the house. "I tried making eggplant lasagna," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck like he was embarrassed, and I smirked, teasing, "Do I look like a vegetarian to you?" He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that loosened the knots in my chest, and answered, "I didn't invite you for the food, I invited you to sit with me at the table, that's already enough." So I sat, even though the plate stayed almost untouched, because conversation kept spilling between us, unforced, natural, broken only by glances that carried more weight than either of us could put into words. He asked me about my childhood, about my mother, about how I ended up fixing internet for half the neighborhood, and I answered carefully, revealing pieces of myself I usually kept hidden, watching as his eyes softened with every detail I offered, as though he was storing each one like something valuable. Time slipped by until it was late, and when I finally stood to leave, he reached out and caught my arm. Not rough, not urgent, just enough to make me turn back. His voice was quiet but steady when he asked, "Oliver, if I asked you to stay, would you?" My pulse jumped so fast it drowned out the silence around us, and for a moment I couldn't speak, not because I didn't want to stay, but because the weight of that question cracked open every fear I had. I wanted to say yes, to drop everything and let myself fall into whatever this was becoming, but fear held my tongue, so I managed only a whisper. "Depends." He tilted his head, his smile small but searching. "Depends on what?" I swallowed hard, meeting his gaze, and said, "Depends on how much you're willing to carry this with me." For a long second he didn't answer, his hand slipping slowly from my arm as if he knew my words weren't hesitation, but a warning. He nodded once, letting the silence stand between us again, and I walked out into the night with my chest tight, my head spinning, because in that single exchange we'd said more than either of us was ready to admit. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the way his fingers lingered on my skin, the way his voice dropped when he asked me to stay, and the way I'd walked away, even though every part of me wanted to remain. For days I kept my distance, convincing myself I needed space, that I couldn't afford to get pulled deeper, but each morning the absence of his presence echoed louder than my resolve. I caught myself riding past his house without reason, slowing down just to see if the lights were on, wondering if he was at the window, wondering if he was thinking of me too. By the time he texted again, just a simple, "Are you okay?" my chest was already aching with the answer I couldn't deny. No, I wasn't okay. Because somewhere between broken connections and borrowed silences, I had let him connect to something inside me I'd sworn I'd keep off limits. And whether I admitted it or not, I already knew I'd be back. For a few days after that dinner, I kept my distance. Not because Eric had done anything wrong, but because what he asked had shaken something loose inside me that I didn't know how to hold. And when you don't have an answer, the easiest thing to do is hide. So I buried myself in work. 3 calls in the morning, another in the afternoon, fixing routers, climbing poles, pretending the routine was enough. But every silence between jobs reminded me of him, the way his words still echoed. If I asked you to stay, would you? It wasn't his question that haunted me, it was how much I wanted to say yes. Nights felt longer than usual, my apartment colder. And even the small victories of the day didn't carry weight because at the back of my mind his voice was there, his eyes were there, the warmth of his hand still on my arm. One evening, restless and unable to take it, I rode past his street under the excuse of checking a signal issue at another address, but the truth was, I only wanted to see if the lights at number 217 were still on, as if that single glow could tell me he was still waiting. They were. And though relief spread through me like heat, I didn't knock, didn't call. I drove off into the night with a sour taste of cowardice on my tongue. The next day, a short message arrived. Are you okay? Simple, almost careless, but it landed like a stone in my chest. I stared at it for hours, knowing exactly what he was asking, but too afraid to type what I felt. The truth was, I wasn't okay. I was unraveling. Because it wasn't just about him, it was about everything I had swallowed for years. All the times I laughed off questions, all the nights I convinced myself silence was safer, all the scars of being told that feeling too much made you weak. And here was someone daring me to feel, daring me to stop hiding. By Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. I went. I knocked with sweaty palms and a heart pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it through the door. He opened, looking tired, his hair tousled, but the moment his eyes landed on me, they lit up like he'd been holding his breath, waiting. I thought you weren't coming back, he admitted, and my voice caught as I replied, I thought so too. Inside, we sat in the living room with a silence heavier than usual, one that pressed against my ribs until finally he broke it with a half apology. If I did something that pushed you away... It wasn't you, I cut him off, my voice rough. It's me, and everything I carry. He didn't push, didn't demand, just leaned back on the couch and asked quietly, Then tell me, what do you carry? And for the first time in my life, I did. Words I'd locked up for decades spilled out. I told him about my mother raising me alone, about my father disappearing, about the neighbors who turned gossip into sport, about the workshop jokes, the bar conversations, the kind of masculinity that left no room for weakness, the years of biting my tongue, of killing parts of myself to fit in. And then I told him about him, about the way he walked into my life without knocking, about the way his silence was louder than words, about the way his eyes had seen straight through me when nobody else ever had. When I finished, his eyes were wet, not with pity, but recognition, like every piece of my story was something he already knew in his bones. His voice trembled when he said, You don't have to hide anymore, Oliver. Not from me. I've been there too. I married someone once, tried to play the part everyone expected, but I woke up one day realizing we were wasting both our lives, and this thing we call life is too damn short to live locked inside other people's rules. My chest broke open at his words, because I knew he wasn't saying them lightly. He was offering me a piece of himself, a truth that cost him. Without thinking, I leaned forward until our foreheads touched. No kiss, no hurried move, just skin against skin, two men trembling but finally aligned. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt, but for the first time it wasn't fear, it was freedom. Courage, I realized, isn't the absence of fear, it's moving even when you're shaking. When I finally stood to leave, he didn't stop me, didn't ask again, only whispered, Will you come back tomorrow? And this time I didn't hesitate. Yes, but only if you cook again. His lips curved into a smile. This time there'll be meat. He laughed, light and unguarded, and that laugh followed me all the way home, filling spaces in me I didn't even know were empty. That night, lying in bed, I knew something irreversible had happened. Not because of a kiss or a touch, but because for the first time I had let someone see me without armor. And he hadn't flinched. The entire day I waited for nightfall, and it wasn't just because of the promised meal or the way Eric had smiled when he mentioned it. It was because for the first time in years I was going to someone's house, not as the guy who fixed their connection, but as someone who'd been invited simply to be there. I bought a cheap bottle of wine on the way, not sure if it even matched what he was cooking, but it felt like the right thing to carry, and when I knocked on the door he opened with that crooked smile that didn't know whether to pull me into a hug or let me slip in quietly, and I stepped inside without hesitation because going back wasn't an option anymore. The table was messy but warm, a salad tossed in a chipped bowl, meat roasting in the oven, 2 simple glasses waiting, and as we sat he asked about my day, not like small talk, but like it mattered, and I told him everything. About the old woman who wanted internet in a house that barely had power, about the dog that chewed through my shoelaces, even about how I caught myself missing his silence more than I expected. He listened with that steady focus that made me feel like news worth hearing, nodding, laughing in the right places, and at one point he just rested his hand over mine on the table without comment, letting it stay there like it belonged. After dinner, we drifted to the balcony, the night air soft against our skin, and he leaned against the railing before asking what scared me most, and the truth slipped out before I could stop it, that I was afraid of letting myself feel and having it change me. His answer was calm but sharp. "You've already changed." My throat tightened as I asked what he feared, and he admitted it was being wrong again, making the same mistakes. But when I asked if he thought this us was a mistake, he shook his head and whispered, "For the first time, no." He stepped closer, so close the air between us bent, and instead of kissing me, he rested his head on my shoulder, asking in a voice barely audible, "Can I just stay here a little longer?" And I let him, because the silence felt sacred. Later, back inside, the pretense of watching a movie lasted only minutes before the weight of his gaze pulled me in, and when he finally kissed me, it was slow, unhurried, full of everything we hadn't said. It wasn't the kind of kiss that asked for more. It was the kind that promised we'd get there in time. We fell onto the couch, laughter spilling between kisses, and at some point I ended up lying with my head in his lap, his fingers running through my hair like he was tracing lines no one else had ever been allowed to draw. Sleep caught me there, not in my bed, not alone, but in the warmth of someone's presence, and when I woke in the grey light of morning, the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Eric stood by the stove, hair a mess, humming softly, and when he noticed me, he smiled and slid a mug toward me like we'd done this 100 times before. I leaned on the counter, clutching the cup, and asked the question that had been pounding in my head all night. "What are we doing, Eric?" He paused, set the pan down, and met my eyes with a steadiness that disarmed me. "We're living, Oliver." The words settled over me with a weight both terrifying and liberating, because for once I believed them. Before I left that day, I told him I'd be back, not with excuses about routers or signals, but because I wanted to. And he answered without hesitation, "Good. I'll be waiting." And walking out into the morning light, I realized something dangerous and undeniable. I already belonged more in that house than I ever had in my own. That night, after a long day of climbing poles and dealing with clients who tested my patience, I found myself craving not silence in general, but his silence. The quiet of Eric's house, the smell of coffee in the air, the soft light across the walls. So I stopped at a bakery, bought a simple piece of cornbread cake, and showed up at number 217 without warning. He opened the door with that knowing smile that said he'd been expecting me. "I was waiting for you," he murmured, and I believed him. We settled onto the same couch as always, the TV playing some random show about lost travelers in the jungle, but neither of us cared. He leaned his head on my shoulder, and the world outside could have collapsed without touching us. At one point he switched off the TV and looked at me serious, asking, "If my family asks about you, sir, what do I say?" The weight of the question pressed on me, but I answered slowly, "Tell them I'm someone who listens, someone who doesn't judge. For now, that's enough." He nodded, leaned in and kissed me, a kiss simple yet carrying all the meaning words couldn't hold, the kind of kiss that tells you two people already know each other, without needing to ask. I stayed again that night, and in the morning, while he slept, I scribbled a note on the kitchen table. The internet signal's perfect, but if it ever drops again, I'll come, even if it's just for coffee. I signed my name with a crooked little heart and slipped out, riding home with the morning wind in my face and the certainty that it wasn't the Wi-Fi pulling me back anymore. It was him, his laugh, the way he listened, the way he'd absent-mindedly hold my hand when he thought I wasn't paying attention. A week later, he invited me to a family gathering, his brother's birthday, small, only relatives and close friends, but the kind of step that felt massive to me. I almost refused, rehearsed excuses, but something in his eyes told me it mattered, so I put on the cleanest shirt I owned and went. His family's house was larger, more traditional, and from the first moment I felt eyes trying to size me up, trying to place me. But Eric greeted me with a smile so private only I could read it. He introduced me as a special friend, though the way he glanced at me between sentences said more than that word ever could. At dinner, his father asked where I worked, how long I'd been at it, questions layered with curiosity and weight, while his mother was kinder, complimenting my cologne and remarking how good it was to see Eric laugh again. I smiled, answered politely, but inside my palms were sweating and all I wanted was for the night to end so I could breathe again. When it finally did, Eric walked me to the car in silence, stopping just short of the door. "Sorry if it was too much," he said, and I shook my head, telling him it was fine even if I felt like an intruder. He cupped my face in his hands, steady and firm, whispering, "You didn't invade anything. You arrived, and I'd been waiting." Then he kissed me in the dark of the parking lot, with the glow of windows above us like 100 whispering witnesses, and for once I didn't care who saw. That kiss wasn't rushed, it was grounding, a silent promise. Driving away, lighter than I'd felt in years, a new fear crept in alongside the warmth. If he'd shown me to his world, was I ready to show him mine? Because up until then, we'd lived inside a bubble, safe, untouched. But love, when it's real, eventually asks for streets, for names, for courage. Early Monday morning, my phone buzzed with a message so short it made my stomach twist. Just his name and 3 words. "I need to see you." No emojis, no pretense, no soft edges. When Eric wrote like that, it meant something heavy was coming. I spent the entire day on autopilot, fixing cables, smiling at clients, climbing ladders, but every tick of the clock was just a countdown until I could get to him. By the time I parked outside number 217, the gate was half open, the house dimly lit, and he was inside on the couch with a half-empty glass of wine, staring at nothing. "What happened?" I asked, my throat dry. He took a long breath, rose slowly and said, "My ex came to see me." The words jolted through me like current. "For what?" I forced out, bracing myself. "She said she missed me, that she wanted to try again, that she'd seen my life moving forward, and maybe we could make it work this time." I froze, not because I doubted him, but because the image alone made my chest ache. "And you?" I asked, more firmly than I felt. He stepped close, right in front of me, and said, "I listened, and it only made me realize I already know exactly what I want. Oliver, it's you." My heart lurched, but before I could reply, he pressed his forehead to mine and whispered, "I don't know what this is becoming or what name to give it, but I know who I want to wake up with. And it isn't the past." I clutched him hard, an embrace that didn't ask questions, just held. But then his voice dropped, heavy, urgent. "There's more. She saw us together at the market. She went straight to my mother afterward, and then my brother called me asking if I had turned. He used that word." My jaw locked. "And what did you tell him?" He looked me dead in the eye. "That if turning means wanting you, then yes, I turned." My knees nearly buckled at the weight of it. For so long I'd hidden, avoided, laughed things off, and here he was naming it, unashamed, handing it back to me with more courage than I'd ever dared. That night I stayed, but there was no rush, no wild kiss, no need for words. We sat in the quiet, 2 men carrying something new but steady, something I realized wasn't about spectacle or labels, but about sharing the heaviness of life, the dishes after dinner, the tired sighs at the end of the day. Love, I finally understood, wasn't about grand declarations. It was about having a chest to rest your head on when the world pressed too hard. And sitting there, listening to the hum of the fridge and the sound of his breathing, I knew the time to face everything had arrived, and for the first time I wasn't running from it. The following week, after everything we'd lived in silence, I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just a phase or some secret I could tuck away. It was time to tell my mother. Mrs. Thompson had always been the backbone of my life, a sharp-eyed woman with a soft laugh who'd carried more than her share of storms since my father walked out when I was a kid. She'd raised me in a modest house on the edge of town, the kind with creaky steps and a porch swing that had seen better days, the kind of home where neighbors waved whether you liked it or not. That Saturday morning I found her in the backyard, watering her roses in her faded denim jacket, moving with the calm of someone who'd learned patience the hard way. Without looking at me, she asked, "Something on your mind, son?" As if she'd already read it on my face. "Yeah," I admitted, nerves tangling my voice. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." She set down the watering can, wiped her hands on her jeans, and finally gave me that piercing look only mothers have. "Go on then." I took a breath that felt like it carried years. "That person I've been seeing, his name's Eric and we're together." For a second I braced for shock, judgment, something. But she didn't flinch. She just crossed her arms and said, almost amused, "And this is supposed to surprise me." I blinked, caught off guard. "You knew?" She chuckled, shaking her head. "Honey, I've known since the day you came home grinning like a fool with no reason to. A mother always knows." My chest tightened as she reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip firm. "I may not have given you everything you wanted growing up, but I raised you to be honest with yourself. Don't waste your life hiding what makes you happy. Love's too short for that." Her words cracked something open inside me, years of fear loosening all at once. I hugged her hard, burying my face in her shoulder, and she held me like she was letting me go and grounding me at the same time. When I left her house, the weight in my chest had shifted into something lighter, something freer. I rode back to Eric's place and didn't even bother knocking this time. I walked straight in, like someone stepping into the place he'd been searching for all along. He was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of coffee, music humming low in the background. He turned when he heard me, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" he asked. I stepped up behind him, wrapped my arms around his waist and pressed my face into the curve of his neck. "Yeah," I whispered. "Now it is." He didn't say anything. He just covered my hand with his, and for a while we stood there, breathing together. No masks left between us. Later we sat on the couch with mugs of coffee, our bare feet touching, and I told him what I'd done. "I told my mom," I said. His eyes widened, searching mine. "And?" I smiled, a little unsteady but proud. "She said love isn't meant to be hidden, and that was it. No drama, no storm, just acceptance." Eric looked down, swallowing hard, and then back up at me with a smile that trembled at the edges. "You're braver than you think, Oliver." I shook my head, meeting his gaze. "No. I just finally stopped running. Because of you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfort. It was home. That night we pulled a mattress into the living room, lying side by side under the glow of the stars outside the window, and for the first time in my life, I felt like love wasn't a secret, wasn't a risk, wasn't a sin. It was just life. Ours. That night felt different, not because of some grand event, but because of the small things. The mattress we dragged into the living room, the way the lamp cast a soft glow on the walls, the hum of the city beyond the windows, fading into nothing while we lay shoulder to shoulder, just breathing in sync. Eric tilted his head toward me and whispered, "Do you remember the first time I asked you to come back? When I said I just wanted to see you again?" I nodded, my chest tightening. "Yeah, I remember." His lips curved into the faintest smile. I lied. "I already knew you were more than just the internet guy." I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. "And I already knew you'd be more trouble than any router I ever fixed." He chuckled too, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, the silence heavy with something we didn't need to name. Outside, the stars flickered through the blinds, and he leaned against me, resting his head on my shoulder like he'd found the one place he fit. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel temporary. It felt like the foundation of something solid. The next morning I woke before him, watching the way the light touched his face, softening the sharp edges, and I realized that somewhere between service calls and excuses, I had stumbled into something I never thought I'd find. Home. Not a place, but a person. Later, over coffee, we didn't talk about labels or the future, just about what groceries we needed, about how the curtains were too thin and let in too much light, about how maybe one day we'd paint the living room. The ordinary felt extraordinary because it was ours. Before I left for work, I caught myself writing another note on a scrap of paper. The Wi-Fi's fine, but if you ever need me to come back, I will, signal or no signal. I left it by the coffee maker where I knew he'd see it, and as I rode off, I realized something vital had shifted inside me. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of being seen, not of being known. Because with him, being exposed didn't feel like danger. It felt like living. A year later, everything looked different and yet felt the same in the ways that mattered most. The tools were still in my backpack, the cables still tangled at the bottom, but now there was a second set of keys on my ring, and every night I knew exactly where I was going. Eric and I had built a life that wasn't about big gestures or movie scenes, but about coffee brewed half awake in the mornings, grocery lists stuck to the fridge, laughter spilling in the kitchen when one of us burned the toast, and quiet evenings stretched out on the couch with our feet tangled under a blanket. The world outside still had its opinions, still whispered, still watched, but inside these walls there was only peace, two men who had stopped hiding, who had decided that love was worth the noise. Sometimes we fought, sometimes the days were heavy, but every night ended the same way, with his head against mine, both of us knowing we'd chosen this, again and again. Looking back, I realized it hadn't started with a kiss, or even with a confession. It started with a simple knock on a door, a broken connection, a pair of silences that recognized each other. And now, sitting beside him on the balcony as the city lights flickered like fallen stars, he reached for my hand without even thinking, and I held his like I'd never let go. For years I thought love was something to keep hidden, a secret to survive. But it wasn't. Love was this, ordinary, messy, extraordinary in its simplicity. Love was waking up to the same face and realizing you never wanted to wake up anywhere else. And as the night breeze carried the scent of rain through the open window, Eric squeezed my hand and whispered, almost to himself, "We made it, didn't we?" I smiled, leaning my forehead to his. "Yeah, we did. And in that moment, with nothing left to prove to anyone, I understood. Sometimes the greatest story you can live isn't the one that shocks the world, but the one that makes you feel at home in your own skin. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever lived a love that forced you to take off your armor and finally show who you really are? Have you ever had to face your fears just to be able to love in peace? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one with care. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell so you never miss the next chapter, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps this space alive and full of stories that deserve to be told.